This is one of those questions that sounds simple, but the more you pull on it, the darker it gets. What if Germany had actually won the Second World War? Not just, what would the map look like, but what would daily life look like? What would you look like, where you'd live, what you'd be allowed to say, think, or believe? Because the answer isn't just scary, it's a complete rewrite of human civilization. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how close it actually came to happening, and why the world we live in today could have looked like something out of a nightmare. Let's start here, because most people don't realize just how real this was. By the summer of 1940, Germany had already taken Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. France, one of the most powerful countries in Europe, fell in just 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Hitler was standing in Paris taking tourist photos at the Eiffel Tower. Britain was on its knees getting bombed every single night during the Blitz. The United States hadn't even entered the war yet. At that point, a German victory wasn't a fantasy. It was a serious possibility that military historians still debate today. So what would have had to happen for Germany to actually win? Historians point to a few key moments where the war could have swung the other way. The first is the Battle of Britain in 1940. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was pounding British airfields so hard that the RAF was nearly broken. Pilots were dying faster than Britain could train new ones. If Germany had kept hitting those airfields instead of switching to bombing cities, Britain may well have lost air superiority. And without that, a German invasion of Britain becomes a real conversation. The second is Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. This is where many historians say Hitler made his biggest mistake. He invaded too late in the year, which meant his army hit the brutal Russian winter without proper winter gear. Soldiers were literally freezing to death. The Germans came within 15 miles of Moscow. You can look that up. 15 miles before the Soviet counterattack pushed them back. If they had taken Moscow, the entire Eastern Front might have collapsed. And the third is America. Before Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the US was largely staying out of the war. If Japan had never attacked Pearl Harbor, or if Hitler had never declared war on the US shortly after, American involvement might have come too late, or not at all. So the scenario isn't crazy. It's grounded in real history. And the scariest part is what comes next. We actually don't have to guess entirely, because the Nazis left behind detailed written plans. And they are horrifying. Germany had a plan called General Plan Ost, the master plan for the East. It was a blueprint for what would happen to Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union after German victory. The plan called for the systematic removal, through starvation, forced labor, and mass killing, of between 30 and 45 million Slavic people from their homelands over 20 to 30 years. The land would then be repopulated with German settlers. This wasn't a secret conspiracy theory discovered after the war. This was a government-approved document written by SS planners. It had timelines, percentages, and regional targets. Poland was slated to lose 80 to 85% of its population. Ukraine, 65%. The Baltic states, around 50%. The Holocaust, which killed 6 million Jews, was already well underway by 1942. In a world where Germany wins, there is no liberation, no Nuremberg trials, no one to stop it. The Holocaust would have been completed, and then the machinery of mass murder would have been turned toward tens of millions of other people. In Western Europe, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, life would have been different, but still deeply oppressive. There's evidence from occupied territories of what German rule looked like in practice. Curfews, forced labor quotas, the banning of political parties, the control of newspapers and radio, the suppression of local culture. People who resisted were shot. People who spoke out disappeared. Britain is interesting. Hitler actually expressed some admiration for the British Empire. He saw the English as a fellow Aryan nation, which, by his warped logic, meant he'd have preferred a negotiated peace over occupation. Some historians believe a defeated Britain would have been forced into a humiliating armistice, handing over its navy, giving up territory, but might not have been fully occupied. America is a different story. Without the war in Europe to fight, the United States would have turned its full attention to the Pacific War against Japan. That conflict likely ends similarly. American industrial power and the atomic bomb were almost inevitable. But America in the 1940s and 50s would be facing a Europe completely dominated by a Nazi superstate. Two nuclear-armed superpowers, one built on liberal democracy, one built on racial hierarchy, authoritarian rule, and the systematic extermination of entire peoples. Now here's where it gets philosophically heavy. In a German victory scenario, the scientific and cultural output of the 20th century looks completely different. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish scientists, artists, writers, and thinkers, many of whom had already fled Germany, would have had nowhere to go. Albert Einstein was Jewish. Richard Feynman was Jewish. So were countless other physicists, chemists, and doctors whose work forms the backbone of modern medicine and technology. The civil rights movement in America, fueled in part by the moral contradiction of fighting fascism abroad while practicing racism at home, might have looked very different in a world where fascism won. The United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the entire post-war international order, none of it exists. It was built specifically because the world looked at what happened and said, never again. Take away the Allied victory, and that moment of collective horror never arrives. The world doesn't just look different on a map. It thinks differently. It values differently. The very idea that every human being has rights, regardless of race, religion, or background, was not some ancient agreed-upon truth. It was a hard-won conclusion drawn from the wreckage of World War II. Without that war ending the way it did, we don't get there. Not in the 1940s. Maybe not ever. The honest answer is a darkness that most of us can barely imagine. Tens of millions more people killed. A continent remade through terror. Science slowed. Human rights delayed. Or simply never arriving. A cold war between democracy and a regime that believed certain people didn't deserve to live.